The Nintendo GameCube is one of my favorite consoles of all time, but as great of a kid as the multicolored lunchbox is, it's not the child Nintendo's most proud of. Why is that, you ask? Well, sit back in your YouTube viewing chair, get a job for a Fortune 500 company, and get fired 2 days before your retirement like my stupid-ass uncle. Press the subscribe button if you haven't already. And allow me, Time Magazine's former YouTuber The Second Cameron, to tell you 10 things Nintendo wants you to forget about the GameCube. Number 10. People didn't appreciate it till way later. Sure, everybody's begging for GameCube games on the Switch in 2019, but back in the early 2000s, people acted like they didn't even know what it was. Which I'm sure has gotta be confusing as hell for N-Dog, cause one of the most common complaints for other consoles since the GameCube has been about how they're not traditional. But the GameCube was a powerful straight-up console with a controller people thought was weird at the time, but like everything else with the GameCube, people swore it was the best thing ever later on. Had people given it an honest chance, I think everyone would have realized how great the GameCube was back in the day. However, the reason nobody gave it a chance was... Number 9. It had a bad reputation. Unlike Joan Jett, the GameCube most certainly gave a damn about its bad reputation, because after all, it prevented tens of millions of people from buying it or even giving it a chance. The GameCube came out during a very interesting time period, because the first big video game craze was the Atari 2600 actually, but that thing sucked ass and didn't keep people playing video games, hence the crash in 1983. However, the second video game craze that actually made people into lifelong gamers happened in the 80s. And of course, a lot of this popularity could be contributed to the NES. But what would come back to bite Nintendo in the PP later on is that most gamers during this time period were kids. So by the time those kids were in high school and didn't want to be seen as children, Nintendo still had the image of being a family-friendly company despite having M-rated games on their platforms. And sadly, the GameCube along with the 64 to a lesser extent happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It didn't matter how fun games like Wind Waker were, because people wanted something super badass and epic like Lord of the Rings and just let the cell shading ruin a good time for them. And like I mentioned earlier with fans loving GameCube stuff later on, fans were unanimously behind the HD remake of Wind Waker on the Wii U. But almost nobody had the cojones to admit that they didn't like the original game. Meanwhile, the all-black PS2 and Xbox had grown-up-only games, so if you wanted to prove to everyone you were a bad boy or girl, then you couldn't be seen with a GameCube. And due to the fact that the GameCube and its controller were pretty wacky and colorful, it just further cemented the perception that the console was meant for kids, even though there really were a lot of people who loved the GameCube's aesthetic. But the one thing about the GameCube's aesthetic that nobody could ever figure out was... Number 8. The handle. To be fair, Nintendo would try to have you believe that they don't want us forgetting about the handle, seeing as how they actually reminded us of it in the Switch's reveal. But actions speak louder than words, and seeing as how they've never brought the handle back for any of their future platforms, I'd say that Nintendo's probably pretty embarrassed about it. It's not terrible or anything, it's just that nobody ever genuinely used it for any other reason that it was just there. And besides the one person who actually thought to put a handle on the GameCube, I don't think it's ever crossed anyone's mind that consoles need handles in the first place. Because if it did, it would have happened before and since the GameCube. The handle's not really a big deal, and it is kinda funny, but if nothing else, the handle just makes the GameCube less convenient to store. Number 7. Trying new things backfired. One of the best things about the GameCube was that it wasn't afraid to try new things. But unfortunately, a lot of gamers were close-minded dicks in the early 2000s and were completely unwilling to try new things. I already mentioned people only focusing on Wind Waker's cel-shaded graphics and deciding it wasn't a real Zelda game. But then there was the completely original Luigi's Mansion. And rather than giving it a chance, many people chose to complain about the GameCube's launch for not having a Mario title. And then when a 3D Mario game finally did come out, people just complained anyway because Mario had a water cannon on his back. A lot of people wanted a direct sequel to Mario 64 so badly that they didn't even bother giving Sunshine a chance. But I think trying something different was actually the best thing, because trying new things makes games timeless rather than being downgraded versions of future installments. After all, I'd wager there's a lot more people actually playing Mario Sunshine than Vice City. But even when people didn't complain about new things with games like Double Dash, Pikmin, and Metroid Prime, the games still weren't popular enough to sell very many GameCubes. So what was Nintendo supposed to learn from this other than fans just want the same things over and over again? Thankfully though, the above-average sized den stuck to their guns and kept trying new things with games after Twilight Princess. Number 6. The discs sucked. Personally, I think the GameCube's discs are pretty cool and give the console more character, but Nintendo's paranoia of piracy came back to haunt them in the early 2000s, because the limited disc space just made games more expensive to produce, which is one of the many pains in the butthole for developers, but more on that later. The smaller discs also made it impossible for the GameCube to play DVDs, which could be its own entry on the list, but seeing as how Nintendo's still yet to have DVD playback on any other consoles since, I don't think it's something they actually want people to forget about. If anything, they're proud they didn't cave to the trend that's now becoming obsolete. But even though discs were absolutely crucial for Nintendo to adopt at the time, not having a cartridge slot ultimately meant. Number 5. No backwards compatibility.
You know, obviously. What are you, stupid?
Well, no, I'm...
Just like you can't fault Nintendo for the Switch not being backwards compatible with the Wii U because it doesn't have a disc drive. You also can't blame them for the GameCube not being backwards compatible with the 64 because it doesn't have a cartridge slot. So why'd I put it on the list? Well, because the PlayStation 2 being able to play every game from the PS1 was another huge disadvantage for the GameCube at the time. And it's probably something Nintendo wishes they could have planned for because it gave the PS2 even more variety in its library as if it even needed it. But speaking of variety, number 4. The GameCube didn't have something for everybody. The GameCube has an assload of games that could be considered among the best ever, but if you preferred games from certain genres, then the GameCube was probably about as appealing to you as my neighbor Terry's independent movie was to the Sundance Film Festival. Nintendo consoles used to be the place where all the best RPGs used to hang out and have their youth chili cook-off. But sadly, the GameCube didn't really have all that many games from the genre. To be fair, it did have more RPGs than the 64, but it was still utterly blown out of the water by the PS2 and even the original Xbox. And if you liked racing, fighting, or sports games, then there were a few options, but you were still better off looking elsewhere. Number 3. Nintendo ditched it immediately. Despite claiming they'd still support the GameCube once the Wii came out, Nintendo dropped it the instant it was clear that the Wii would be a hit. Which shouldn't have surprised anybody, but then again, when the Switch came out, people honestly thought that Nintendo would still support the Wii U. Obviously, they lie about supporting older platforms, because no tech company would ever tell consumers not to buy their products for any reason at all. And given that the Wii was backwards compatible, it really wasn't that big of a deal Nintendo ditched the GameCube. But still though, this was the very beginning of Nintendo lying about supporting dying consoles. Although to be fair, I will give them credit for half-ass trying with the 3DS. Number 2. Nintendo lost Rare. As bad as things got for Nintendo during the days of the 64, and even when things started slowing down towards the end of the Super Nintendo's life, the good folks at Rare always had N-Dog's back. But then for some reason, when Nintendo actually had a chance to buy the company in 2002, they decided nah and let Microsoft snatch them up. Which Microsoft then decided to utilize the developers to their fullest potential and crank countless classics out for years to come, like the remake of the original Conker's Bad Fur Day that somehow was more censored on the Xbox, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, which fans unanimously agree is the best in the series, and of course who could forget that random pirate game that nobody even plays. Thankfully, Phil Spencer's a man of the people and not a dick about Banjo appearing in Smash Ultimate, but hopefully now that Banjo's proven to be a hot commodity, a third game's finally gonna happen. And yes, this would be a third Banjo game. Pilot, Nuts and Bolts, and even Grunty's Revenge are not Banjo 3, so I don't want to hear it in the comments. But along with treating Rare like jabronis, let's talk about the most mind-blowing thing about the GameCube that Nintendo definitely wants people to forget and ought to be ashamed of. Number 1. Nintendo were awful to third parties. This right here is pretty much the entire reason why I felt the need to make this video in the first place. Because if the internet were as prominent back then as it is today, then Nintendo would have been absolutely eviscerated for the things they said about third-party developers when it came to the GameCube. In December of 2000, just months before the launch of the GameCube, Nintendo's president stressed that they weren't approaching third parties to make games. Instead, they expected third parties to come to them once the GameCube started growing their install base. Pretty idiotic, I know, but things only got worse from that point forward. In August 2001, 1 month before the GameCube launched, Nintendo of America's top marketing executive at the time, Peter Main, stated that their focus wasn't on maximizing the number of developers for the GameCube, and Satoru Iwata actually flat out said that Nintendo doesn't believe in overwhelming third-party support. And not only that, but Nintendo was also charging a higher licensing fee for third parties to develop GameCube games at $11 versus $7 to $9 on the Xbox and PS2. But what's easily the worst quote of them all in regards to third-party support on the GameCube is when Nintendo's president Hiroshi Yamauchi said that it's not a race to see how many useless companies you could get on your side. And he, along with Iwata, dug Nintendo's hole even deeper a few months later when they were heavily criticizing AAA developers for making games for multiple consoles. Plus, Nintendo also had shortages on development kits and even delayed giving third parties access to them. So it's no wonder they wanted very little to do with the GameCube. But the light at the end of the tunnel here is that Nintendo eventually learned their lesson, even if it was the hard way. And seeing as how they learned their lesson, I guarantee you that they don't want assholes like me reminding everybody how stupid they used to be. But I'll tell you two people who third parties love developing games for today's patrons of the day, Aaron Ayala and Buffalo from Utah.
Or if you'd rather show support by picking a shirt or mug up, then send pictures or videos of you rocking it to make a cameo like these badasses right here.
What do you think though? Are there any embarrassing facts about the GameCube that I missed? Was there anything I mentioned that's not a big deal? Or did I hit it out of the park like I've been known to do from time to time? Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below and I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody.
Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to see more videos like this. And if you want to help this channel grow, then simply liking and sharing goes a long way. My name's Cameron and I'll see you next time.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty. Thank you for your support.